The phone call brought police to a small house on East New York Street, and the moment the officers stepped inside, the place tried to talk over itself. People answered questions too fast, offering explanations no one had asked for, then falling silent in the same breath. A teenage girl stood near the hallway with her arms tight against her sides, watching every movement like she expected punishment for it. When an officer asked where Sylvia Likens was, several people glanced upward, toward the stairs, and no one moved. Upstairs, in a bare bedroom, Sylvia lay on a soiled mattress on the floor. She was 16. Her body was covered in injuries that had layered over time: severe bruises, cuts, open sores, burns, and scald marks, and her face was swollen and discolored from repeated blows. She was extremely underfed, her frame reduced until it looked wrong for her age, like her body had been slowly erased. She wasn't breathing. One of the officers backed out, swallowed hard, and radioed for an ambulance that would arrive too late. Downstairs, the girl in the hallway finally gave her name: Jenny Likens. She was 15, Sylvia's younger sister. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she made one request: "Get me out of this house right now, and I'll tell you everything." She leaned her weight onto one leg, the other held stiff from old polio, and even that small detail mattered, because it showed how trapped she had been. Leaving meant limping out past the same adults who had been watching, and risking what they might do if she tried. Months earlier, in July 1965, Sylvia and Jenny arrived in Indianapolis with a suitcase and the kind of temporary confidence kids learn from living on the road. Their parents, Lester and Betty Likens, traveled for work with carnival concessions, moving from town to town. They needed someone to house the girls while they were away, and they arranged for the sisters to stay with Gertrude Banishevsky, a divorced mother raising a large family in a cramped home. The agreement was simple: the girls would live there, and their parents would pay Gertrude for their care. The Banishevsky house was crowded and loud, with children coming and going as if the front door didn't belong to any one family. Gertrude complained often about her health and her finances, about being overwhelmed, about people failing her. At first, Sylvia and Jenny tried to fit in. Sylvia was described as friendly and trusting, the kind of kid who could make conversation easily, who wanted to be liked. Jenny had a physical disability from polio that affected her leg, which made her slower and more vulnerable in a house where impatience could turn into anger. As the weeks passed, the payments from the Likens' parents became inconsistent. Sometimes they were late. Sometimes they didn't arrive. Gertrude's frustration turned into resentment, and resentment found a target. She began singling Sylvia out for minor things: an expression on her face, a tone in her voice, a mistake on a chore. Then the scolding turned into punishment. Sylvia was struck with hands, then with objects that happened to be nearby. If she cried, she was punished for crying. If she tried to explain herself, she was punished for talking back. If she stayed silent, Gertrude called it attitude. There was no safe response once Sylvia had been chosen. The escalation didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened the way cruelty often happens when it's allowed to grow. One boundary crossed, then another, until the new normal becomes unrecognizable. Gertrude's children learned quickly what behavior kept them safe, and they learned what behavior earned approval. Neighborhood kids were drawn in as well. They didn't arrive as criminals. They arrived as children looking for attention, and in that house, attention was handed out through participation. Gertrude framed the abuse as discipline, as correction, as something Sylvia deserved. The more people joined, the easier it became for everyone to pretend it was justified. Sylvia was slapped, punched, kicked, and mocked. She was made to do exhausting tasks and then punished for failing to do them fast enough. Food became a tool of control. She was denied meals, given little enough to keep her alive, then taunted when hunger made her desperate. Her injuries multiplied, Burns were inflicted repeatedly, leaving blisters and open wounds that were left untreated. She was struck in the face and head. She was humiliated in ways meant to break her spirit. A large 3 was burned into her chest. Words were carved into her stomach, not as truth, but as a brand meant to follow her forever. Jenny watched it happen and learned the rules the hard way. If she defended her sister, she would be punished too. If she stayed silent, she might survive another day. At times she was forced into participation, pushed into compliance by fear and by the authority every adult in the house claimed over them. Sylvia was increasingly isolated. She was kept from school and cut off from anyone outside the house who might notice her condition changing. Her world narrowed to the rooms where she was controlled and the voices that told her she deserved it. The neighborhood didn't have to imagine what was happening inside. Children came and went, noise carried. Sylvia's condition worsened in a way that would have been obvious to anyone who looked at her. But inside the house, the group kept reinforcing itself. Speaking up meant challenging Gertrude, and challenging Gertrude meant risking her anger. Silence became a kind of participation, and over time it became easier for everyone to accept what they were seeing than to stop it. By October, Sylvia could barely walk. Standing took effort. Her injuries were infected. Her body was failing from malnutrition layered on top of repeated trauma. In the final days, she was confined and denied basic care. Her wounds left open, her strength draining away while life in the home continued around her. On October 26, 1965, Sylvia Likens died in that house. Her death was attributed to a severe head injury with bleeding in the brain, compounded by shock and extreme malnutrition. When police arrived, people inside tried to control the story. They spoke of accidents and misunderstandings. They shifted blame from one person to another, as if responsibility could be passed around until it disappeared. But the upstairs room didn't allow for confusion, and Jenny's request to be removed broke the grip the house had held over her. Once she was safe, she described what had been happening, and the picture that formed wasn't a single person's rage. It was a pattern, repeated, encouraged, and shared. Arrests followed. Gertrude Banishevsky, several of her children, and neighborhood teens who had taken part were charged. In court, the details horrified the public not just because of what was done, but because it happened inside an ordinary home with so many witnesses. Gertrude was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Others were convicted on lesser charges, including second-degree murder and manslaughter. Sylvia Likens became a measure of failure, of adults who had power and used it to harm, of bystanders who sensed something was wrong and did nothing, and of systems that never reached her in time. Jenny survived, but survival carried its own cost. She walked out of that house alive, carrying the memory of every moment she couldn't stop and every moment she was forced to endure. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.